Hello, brothers. My name is Doug Draper, and I am a 1992 graduate from University of Kansas. I'd like to welcome you to On the Banks. On the Banks is the only fraternity podcast where we meet brothers, share stories, and embrace our shared values of Phi Gamma Delta. And today I have a wonderful guest. It's kind of one of those things whenever you're having an interview or whatever, you have to be completely transparent that this is awesome because Kevin and I know each other from our undergraduate days. But before we get into that, I'd like to welcome Kevin Kuster with Watch the Love. Kevin, how's it going, man?
I'm doing good, Doug. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to see the chapter house behind you over there. So
yeah, look at that.
I know it is awesome. So let's see here. We are going to talk about your nonprofit that you created, and really about how things are changing lives and making connections, right? But before we jump into it and learn about the nonprofit, I want to introduce yourself so people know a little bit about our guests. So Kevin Kuster is a graduate from University of Kansas. Go Jayhawks.
Jayhawks.
Yeah, he's a founding member and creative director for Watch the Love. As we'll get into, that's a global nonprofit. It's really focused on distributions of solar lights and other solar technologies to the 1.3 billion people in the world that are living without light and reliable energy. And we'll talk about why that's important here as we jump on. You're also a partner and president of JJ Communities that really helps brands develop collaborative social marketing experiences. You spent 12 years hanging out at the Playboy Mansion, which we'll get into that a little bit.
Actually, 19.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. You've done some Second City training up there in Chicago, so this will be a lively discussion. You're a current member of the BCA of Kansas, which we're appreciative of, and I think you once owned a dog named Bill when you were an undergraduate, which we got to keep that in there for sure. I'm not sure if you remember that or not, but I remember him running around the chapter house and having a good time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So let's just jump into it and start with a quick overview of what is Watch the Love, what it does, how it got started, and kind of go from there. So all's in your court. Kevin, tell us about your business there and the nonprofit.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I think it's really great that you're doing this, and it, in some respects, brings it full circle. And it just seems like it's a natural extension for me to talk with you about Watch the Love and really how the fraternity, Pi Deuteron in Kansas, was really truly instrumental in helping Watch the Love get launched. But so Watch the Love, like you said, is a global nonprofit, and we distribute solar lights, individual solar lights to people in developing countries that have no access to light and electricity. The thing that's really unique about that, most people have no concept. If you've, grew up here in the United States or in a developing country, they have no idea or no concept that there's, just a little over 1 billion people on the planet that when the sun goes down, they have no access to electricity and light. So these people burn kerosene, or some people call it white gas. But it's the most rudimentary thing you can possibly imagine. So the people that we're serving, we specifically go after the poorest of the poor, so the bottom 5% of the world's poor. Some refer to them as the forgotten. So these are like really the poorest on the economic ladder. And even if there is electricity in the area that they live, they can't afford it. Typically in places like Uganda, the Philippines, Guatemala, if there is electricity, there's just a connection cost to bring it to their hut, and then they can't even afford the monthly fees. So these are people that will probably never be on the energy ladder. And when we give them these solar lights, it's these individual solar lights. It radically changes their life. And what most people don't understand is they were probably, if you're listening to us now, you probably have access to more electricity than, these 1 point something billion people do. But what the solar light does is once they have the light, not only do they eliminate the cost for purchasing kerosene or white gas, which is super dangerous, super toxic, and it actually begins helping them break the cycle of poverty. Because not only are they no longer picking up that expense to have light at night, but it increases work productivity so they can work longer. It provides children access to light to study. So the child who has access to a light will attain up to 2 years more of formal education. And for health and safety purposes, I mean, we run into people all the time that are horrifically burned because the kerosene puts out so little light when these kids are studying. They're literally like a foot away from this open flaming torch. And it's terrible because it's basically like a Molotov cocktail waiting to explode. Like they'll find any type of container, all tin can, soda pop can, a baby food jar, and they just knock a hole in it, put a wick, and light it. And then they're in this all wood, all bamboo environment. So it's really it's life changing for them once they receive the light.
Yeah, interesting. So we always like to start at the beginning with the shows here, and we're not going to jump into the details of Playboy and how you were involved with that. That's a whole nother show that we can talk on the cable channel. We'll talk about that one on the cable channel. But the question for you is, it's quite a pivot, right? To go from that type of environment and the hustle and bustle of Chicago and the traditional business world, so to speak. And then all of a sudden you're involved with a nonprofit that is pretty amazing, but really nothing to do with this, what you studied in college and everything else. So talk about that pivot and what happened to make the pivot and why you decided to really get involved and start Watts of Love.
Sure. So like I said, I was at Playboy for about 19 years. And really had a, how do I say, just a life-changing, altering time. Just some tragedy befell me, and it just really made me take a moral inventory of my life, my choices, and what I was doing. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. But when I left Playboy, I just really decided, and also some of it's through a faith journey, that I just decided that I was going to really dedicate the next chapter, the next portion of my life to giving back and serving others. Didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I mean, I was clueless. I just had this real desire to serve, and service and, helping other people, if I'm really being brutally honest, was not in my train of thinking really at all. Post-college, I was very kind of self-focused, self-centered, kind of really about me, wanting to move up that corporate ladder, wanting to attain more, wanting to earn more. And I just had a really, really big change of heart, and to which I'm so thankful. I'm more proud and more excited about the things that I'm doing today with Watts of Love than anything I've ever done. But really, what happened was, it's beginning. So my sister, she went to the Philippines and had a very profound experience, met this young girl who was horrifically burned by kerosene, and, was explaining the story of how so many children and people are burned by it. And she just felt really called and really convicted to do something about it. She and I, my brother-in-law, went to distribute lights in the South China Sea, the first 1,000 lights. And literally, when I say we had no idea what we were doing, we had no idea what we were doing. Literally nothing. But we distributed the first 3 lights because all the other lights got stuck in customs. But those 3 lights that we distributed, it was incredible. To this day, those 3 lights and the recipients were foundational to Watts of Love. But and the things that we saw those people do with those first lights were amazing. And just real quickly, like the first woman that we gave her light, she could not wait to have us come back to her hut the next day. And she's, grabbing us by our hand, taking a translator, and we take her to a hut. And in one night, not only did she not, spend money burning kerosene, but as her kids were sleeping, she had carved 1,000 bamboo skewers. And she was going to the market that day to sell the skewers to the guy who sells fried bananas. So literally in one night, this woman had become an entrepreneur. She'd become a small business owner. And it just radically changed her and her family's life. And those types of stories kept revealing themselves more and more. And, here we are 8 years later, having delivered almost 30,000 lights across the globe.
That's awesome. That's great. The one word that you used was finding your purpose, right? And I think that's super important. And I think there's, that, again, a whole different type of story, but the fact that you found it and you acted upon it, that's pretty amazing. And there's lots of people that just go through life and say, I guess we're going to, punch the clock and move on. And so the fact that you found your purpose and moving forward, I would encourage, all the brothers out there to find your purpose and grab it and go.
Yeah.
So those words were, stuck to me just a second ago. But I want to jump into like, how the heck do you start a nonprofit, right? So you have this excitement, you've kind of found out what you want to get involved with and your purpose. And then the story I like is kind of how the brothers and the fraternity helped you get things started. So you know what you want to do. It's a nonprofit. We're going to go, bring lights to the world. How the heck did you get it started? I don't even, go from there.
Again, like I said, when we first started, we had no idea what we were doing. And actually it's through difficulty that you learn stuff, right? Like I'll tell you, before I begin the process of how Watts of Love began, when we distributed the first 3 lights and the 1,000 didn't show up, we thought this was the most tragic thing ever, right? And it was. And my old Playboy thinking kicked in, and it was like, okay, we need to make stories out of this and content out of these, because we had 3 lights with us. So we were like, who are the people that are most in need of these 1,000? Who are the 3 people that are most in need? And we're going to go distribute the lights, tell their story, capture picture, capture video to honor the people that had given us the funds to do it. But, in terms of the purpose, what I will tell you is this. I feel like people should look for their purpose. And where I stand now, 8 years later, it seems obvious, right? Like this was my purpose. But really, we just started making the next right step. We did not have this big, huge, grand vision of this global nonprofit. It was like, we're going to go distribute lights. Oh, we're going to distribute these 3 lights. We're going to tell these 3 stories. We're going to go back and distribute the next 1,000. And then, so we made a set of small steps. And as we were doing that, the purpose and, my purpose was revealed. But when you start a nonprofit, literally, you have no idea how to do it. And my whole thing was all of my Playboy training experience taught me about brand, content, marketing, communications. So that was going to be my area of focus in terms of the nonprofit. And literally, you just reach out to people that you think will support you. And my fraternity brothers were absolutely incredible. I reached out to, we had this, I put this thing on Facebook saying, hey, we need to do a website. And Paul Diamond, who happened to be the senior when I was a pledge, he just responds like interested. He donates his time and his company's time to build our website. Then we wanted to design a new light. I reached out to one of my other fraternity brothers, Phil Holsinger, who also happened to be a senior when I was a pledge there. And Phil's an industrial designer, and he started to help us design our first light. Then we're moving into patenting the light and setting up a for-profit business. Reach out to Roger Templin, who's also a fraternity brother at the time. And Roger helps us through navigate, those legal waters. And then ultimately, finally, like the culmination of it was, we had a music fest. And so each step along the way, I would reach out, and my sister and my brother-in-law would reach out to resources that they have. And my single greatest resource, even to this day, was my friendships and my relationships and the talents of the guys that I went to school with, 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. You had made mention of telling stories and how impactful that can be. And I think that there's a story that I'd like to get involved with that you and I have personally been connected in the last year. And I kind of like to think of this as there was an undergraduate philanthropy with the current brothers in the chapter house right now that really inspired an unfulfilled wish that ultimately helped the village. Right? There's 3 components there that are pretty amazing. And when we were talking about this episode, it just popped in my head that we have to tell this story out there because it underscores a lot of the values, the 5 values of fraternity, talks about connections, and certainly underscores purpose. And so I'm going to, talk a little bit about the very first part, and then I'm going to have you take it from there. But pre-COVID, back in 2019, the undergraduates wanted to partner with you for a fundraiser for Watts of Love. I was in attendance, had a lot of brothers, and it was great. So from that point, talk about what that fundraiser looked like, what its purpose was, obviously to help the organization, but talk a little bit about how that came to be, and then we can get into to Bill Radcliffe and his story.
So actually, Ken, the graduate and undergraduate chapters have been incredible. In the most recent, involvement by the undergraduates, where they had been introduced through Watts of Love. And I spoke at last year's PIG dinner, and then they wanted to have a fundraiser. They're going to do like a casino night, poker night to raise money, and Watts of Love was going to be the beneficiary of it. And the guys just worked so hard on it, and their effort was really pretty palpable. And so many guys were really interested in getting involved, and helping to raise money. And again, I didn't go there with this intention, but I was so moved by their effort and what they wanted to do to help Watts of Love. As they kind of told us what they had raised, I spontaneously said there, I'm like, hey, I would love to see if we can try and start raising some funds where we could send a undergraduate or 2 undergraduates on a trip with us every year, to Africa or South America or Asia. Do you think there'd be any interest in that? And of course, so many of the guys were super excited, because when you're in college, each person that goes on a trip has to do a level of fundraising to supply the lights. And it really gives people skin in the game. It makes the situation that much more impactful for them when they're actually handing the light out. They know their hard work and their fundraising helped to give this person their light. But that task can seem a little daunting to someone in college. So the idea of having this scholarship was kind of birthed. And I kind of said that we would put those monies towards the scholarship. And there was this real momentum that was kind of building. It was pretty exciting. And then COVID hit, right? And the idea of people getting on planes and going to 3rd world countries didn't suddenly seem super exciting to people.
Right.
We hoped and we thought that the world would come back to some sense of normalcy, but we still kind of had this momentum and we were trying to figure out what to do. And then, we had and I'm not sure if it's okay, if you want to, we'll pivot in terms of what it ultimately, blossomed into.
Yeah.
But So
no. Yeah. So I'll kind of jump into this one since I'm out in Colorado. So, pocket or pack that story up that you just said. And then out here in Colorado, there's a graduate that we both knew, Bill Radcliffe, lived down in Colorado Springs and had an unfortunate accident and lost his life. And that was in spring, summer of last year. And so one thing that knowing Bill, we were trying to do something for him, and his pledge class was instrumental in doing some things. But then he made some comments to you that a lot of people were unaware of, that sparked the next journey in this story. So tell us about what he had said to you in the past that brought it up, and kind of how that continued to evolve.
Yeah. So Bill was like 3 or 4 years younger than me. And his dad, Bob Radcliffe, was kind of just an omnipresence at the house, right? And also national. Like he was just, when I was a pledge, man, Mr. Radcliffe was just the best.
Mm-hmm.
And when his son came along, because there was that age difference, we still connected. But once I graduated, right, you kind of lose touch, right? And then all of a sudden, through the power of social media, years later, you start connecting with people. And when I was traveling with Watts, I always would write from a very first person perspective, right, about my experiences, the people I was encountering. And I remember very clearly, this is several years ago, there was a young boy in the Philippines that I just had this incredible bond with and experience by the name of Gilbert.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote about Gilbert. And all of a sudden, late night, my phone pings, and it's Bill Radcliffe. And Bill's like, "Hey, Cuss, I just read your story about Gilbert. Absolutely amazing." And just very heartfelt. And what happened over the course of like the next 2.5, 3 years is Bill would, whenever I'm traveling, inevitably, if my phone went off in the middle of the night, I knew it was Bill. And Bill had just read one of my posts and would always send me these very encouraging, very personal, very passionate, messages of encouragement. But weaved in there, he would always say, "I really want to go on a trip with you. How do I move into an area where I can make more impact and change people's lives?" And I was always like, "Bill, the hardest thing to do is to say yes. Like you just got to buy the ticket, right? You're never going to have the right enough. You're not going to have a big enough bank account. You're not going to have the time. You're not going to have the right calendar schedule. Like you just have to say yes." And he was always like, "You're right. You're right. I know. I got to do this. I got to do this." And that was kind of a pattern that went on for, a couple of years. Um, and then when I would come back, we'd have these very, very long, heartfelt talks. And there was always, even though there was this year separation, there was this just real kindred spirit between the two of us. And I could see he was someone who was looking to transition. But that also seemed very daunting, right? Like you get at a certain age and you've got all these responsibilities in life, and how do you do that? So when ultimately, we got the news that Bill had passed, um, that made me really reflect on Bill's notes and messages to me. Um, and I, reached out to you and one of the pledge brothers, and I was like, "You know what? What if we pivot this money that we raised rather than sending someone?" Um, actually, let me take that back. It was one of his pledge brothers and one of your pledge brothers that contacted me and said, "Hey, what if we did this memorial for Bill?" And they didn't even know the stories of the communications that I was having with him. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that'd be great." And then I kind of revealed to you and some of the other people how we had been communicating with, you guys went to Bill's mom and were like, "Yeah, let's do this." So rather than taking those funds that we had raised for the poker night, we just kind of, that was our nest egg to begin fundraising in Bill's honor. Um, and then your class and Bill's class and a whole bunch of other people just really promoted it. And the whole idea was we were going to raise enough money to hopefully light a village. And that's ultimately what we wound up doing. We raised enough money to distribute about 150 lights, and those were just distributed in Bill's honor in Malawi, Africa. And I just like to think that although Bill didn't go with us physically, spiritually, his presence was really felt. And I just felt like this was a really great way to honor him. He was always so supportive of me, even though he wasn't there. He was always a big cheerleader. And I felt like when they were distributing these 150 lights, like Bill was the biggest cheerleader and just thrilled to see the lives that were going to be changed through his memorial.
Yeah. Well, the one, there's lots of positives in that story, and I'm super excited. There's again a couple things. Number one, you said say yes, and in our first series of On the Banks, we had an interview with a brother named May, and his show was all about lead with yes. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to say yes and jump forward and everything else. So that really caught my attention there. So the other cool thing about this is you made a video, right? Yeah. So the experience was in the moment, and you wanted to capture it, which is your forte and what you did for 19 years. And there's a video, and obviously we'll post that the brothers will be able to go to and check out. And it's pretty moving, man. I have to say, knowing Bill and knowing the situation and everything else, it was, very, very emotional. It's pretty cool. So in that video, right, and all the brothers will be able to check it out. There was a couple of words and statements that were made throughout the video, and I just wanted to throw those out to you and maybe have you elaborate on what that meant, because some of them are pretty self-evident, right? Safety at night, but there's a few others that weren't. I'm like, okay, how does that word and how does that description fit into Watts of Love? Mm-hmm. So obviously the first one was safety at night. So, talk a little bit about, other than the obvious, what that means for a village that's just, having a light, all of a sudden. So talk about what that term means, safety at night.
It's from very, simple ideas where a lot of these people, particularly in the vast majority of the times, it's women and young children. They get up before the sun rises, right? To walk to the well, to draw water for the day. And they're going in the night, right? So not only is it rocky terrain, but you have all kinds of animals and things like that. And that also just kind of leads me into, bad things happen in the night. The places we go, there really aren't laws, there aren't police, mm-hmm. and women and children are incredibly vulnerable, right? And just the simple of having a light that someone can be seen or someone knows something is going on. And we actually even built into the light, we've got a ability where the light will flash, and it's kind of like a recognition beacon. Mm-hmm. So you can see at night, right? Like just being able to see, because like people don't understand, like when you say when the sun goes down, they live in darkness, right? Because there is no ambient light anywhere. It is pitch black. So the safety it provides is just enormous.
Yeah. So the next phrase that was in there in the video was opportunity, hope, and empowerment. Those were three words that were put together. Expand on that a little bit. What does that mean in the Watts world?
Well, so opportunity, when we have this training program that we do, so we just don't hand out a light, right, and walk away. Our big philosophy is, don't give someone a fish, teach them how to fish, and, they can feed them themselves for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And so when we give them the light, they all have to do this, what we call an empowerment program, where we're like, okay, so now you've gotten rid of your kerosene, and you're saving X amount of goods or pesos every day. What's going to be your goal? Are you going to buy a chicken? Are you going to buy a pig? You're going to buy a tin roof. So we set them up to create opportunities to change their lives. And that opportunity looks different with each individual. They decide what they're going to do. An empowerment is, it provides, one of the greatest things, we had NYU did a capstone study on us, and they said that it's like, it provides them dignity. And you're like, well, how can that be? It's a light. And really, it's just the simplest way I can describe it as these people want a hand up. They don't want a handout, and when you give someone an opportunity to change their life, it dignifies them and it
Mhm.
gives them dignity, because we're like, hey, we're not going to come back here and develop a culture of dependency. We give you something over and over and over again. It's like, no, this is your opportunity. This is your light. We're going to show you how you save. We're going to show you how you can invest, and you can buy, farm animals, and you can educate your child. And then it's up to you.
Mhm. That's great. The other one that popped again through the video is education.
Yep.
Again, I think it's like the darkness, but I think there's a lot more to that. So education, there's the next word to comment on.
So, like I said previously, when we give a child light, they attain up to 2 years more of formal education. And there's some studies that say that they'll read almost 50% more when they have a light. And what that also impacts is, I think this is the correct stat, but it's like um, a child that is born to a mother that doesn't have at least a grade school education has almost a 50% chance of staying in that cycle of poverty and dying before the age of 5.
Mm.
Right. So it's like, it's this constant poverty upon poverty, right? And when you can start breaking it, right, it has a generational effect. And
Yeah,
it's education. It's all about education.
yeah. And then the last on the video, it says, and most importantly, joy.
Hmm.
I'm sure joy encompasses a lot of things, but expand on that term, joy related
Yeah,
to Watts.
I would say of all the things that I do, that is the greatest thing about the whole job.
Mhm.
Mission. Because when we consistently get this, we go into places and they're like, why are you here? Right? They cannot believe that we have flown all the way to America to some, fly into Entebbe and into Kampala, and then a 5-hour bus ride out to this totally off the beaten path, lost village. And they just can't believe we're here. And we're like, we're here to serve you. We're here to give you these lights. We're here to, do this empowerment program to help break this current life existence that you're in. And the joy and the excitement that these people convey
Mhm.
is unbelievable. I mean, there really is, and I'm not exaggerating. There's places when we will show up at a village and we can't even start distributing lights because they will be singing and dancing and have this presentation going on, and it'll take like 45 minutes, an hour, because they're just so excited and they've got all these skits and things that they want to do us, and they just shower us with joy. And because it's one of those things where they are there's the recognition of their seen,
Mhm.
they're not forgotten, and the joy is just incredible.
Mhm. So this is a tough question to ask, I'm sure, and you mentioned it a little bit when we started about those first lights that you distributed, but what's your accomplishment at Watts that gives you the most pride and that you're most proud of that you've done in the last 9 years?
Boy, I guess I guess I'm going to go with the first thing that said popped in my mind, that we continued to say yes, right? Or we continued to say, okay, how do we turn that into a yes, right?
Mhm.
Because there is just nothing but obstacles that come in at you day in and day out, right? And especially, it's simple as, okay, the lights or as big as the lights didn't show up, to as simple as, okay, we want to serve this village, but there's no roads there. How do we get there?
Mhm.
Um, and I think the one thing that's been so great about Watts of Love, and now the people that we attract to travel with us, is when you're around people who it is their heart's desire to serve, they look for yeses. They look to try and find ways to make impact and to overcome little obstacles and enormous obstacles. And I think Watts of Love, through its mission, has even taught me even more how important it is to say yes, and how many people and how the world wants you to always hear no.
Mm. So you've done a great job of explaining where Watts is here and now and the accomplishments that have happened, which have just been tremendous, and the way the brothers have touched the organization. Where do you see Watts 5 years out? Right. I mean, COVID's thrown a wrench into lots of different things. And I know people are the travel aspect of the engagement. There's some hesitancy there. So I know you guys are aware of that. I know that you're always looking to the next, you're always looking for yes. So
Yep.
give us a picture of what 5 years out looks like for Watts of Love.
So 5 years out, one of the things that was great is we were really well positioned when COVID hit. Tragically, it changed the world, but
Mm-hmm.
we had set up where we started to realize that to always put people on planes to distribute lights really limited our impact. So we started to develop local partners. They're almost kind of like franchisees, right? Similar to any major corporation that franchises. We wanted to find very strategic local partners that understood the Watts of Love way, that embraced our empowerment program, that embraced that it just wasn't handing out a light and disappearing or coming back over and over again, building a culture of dependency. So we found local partners that understood our methodology and our heart's desire. And we've now been shipping lights to them, and they're training their local people, and they're raising up new leaders to distribute more lights. And Watts of Love will still always have the component part of going and sending people. But now what we've seen is, since we started to travel again, we just had a team go to Malawi. We got another team getting ready to go to Malawi, and another one getting ready to go to Uganda. Is the people that now travel with us, rather than doing all this hands-on training, right? They're mentoring people. They're training the trainers, right? They're training people how to really inspire people. There's something different about, me as an American coming in telling someone, hey, you can do this, right? You can change your life. And it's kind of like, you met sometimes with a little bit of level of skepticism where it's like, oh, that's easy for you to say. But when you have a local trainer saying, look, I did this, I took my light and I put my kid through school, or I bought a tin roof, then they're speaking, villager to villager. And, so now we're sending people to kind of raise up the next generation of trainers to increase our impact. So I definitely see that is going to be something that we're doing even more and more.
That's great. So the show is called On the Banks, and for those that may not have read The Purple Pilgrim or remember it in great detail, the Banks is a reference to Boulevard G. Krebs and John Templeton McCarty meeting at the banks of the river out in Wyoming as they were heading to the gold rush. And it's a chance meeting of brothers. And what we're doing here with the series On the Banks is meeting of brothers. So I always like to ask our guests, have you ever had an On the Banks moment in your life? And it could be related to Watts. It could be related to your times in Chicago at Playboy. Just in general, have you ever had an On the Banks moment?
I would say yes. And the thing that, like, even hearing you talk about it right now on, you were saying by chance encounter. And it wasn't necessarily an enchance counter, but it was incredibly profound. We had started to move along with Watts of Love, and I kind of named some of the other brothers previously that helped. But one of your fraternity brothers was having a wedding, and I was in Kansas City for the wedding, and he had asked one of my fraternity brothers, who was at the time, a pretty popular college band, and he had asked them to come and play at his wedding. And this is years and years later. And so they're playing, and then so there's two of my fraternity brothers and two of your fraternity brothers, and then a fifth fraternity brother, all get up on the stage and they're all playing. And three of them are from different bands. And I just saw all of these guys that were my age, incredibly talented, having fun and rocking the house. And I just thought it was so profound.
Mhm.
And I said to myself, I'm like, wow, like they all have their own bands. Like that's three bands with three different guys from the same house. I'm like, we could have a music festival, right? And I went to the guys and I said, hey, look, I had this crazy idea. I was really inspired at the wedding and I saw you guys all up there. And all three of the bands had never played before, right? They just were all doing their own thing. I'm like, what if we could do a music festival and you guys are the three headline bands? They loved it. And they thought it was just, the idea was absolutely fantastic. And we launched Watts and Amps. And we did this music festival, 2 years in a row. And it was really the first like major fundraiser that Watts of Love did. And it was just absolutely incredible. But the greatest part about the whole thing is after the first one, I went home and I was speaking with my dad. And at the time, my dad was 90 years old. And I'm like, oh, this is the money that we raised, and this is the fun, and blah, 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 and talking about everything. And he just stopped me and he's like, Kevin, he goes, I got to stop you. He goes, you've missed the most incredible thing about that whole story. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, here you are almost 20 plus years out of college. And you had these guys from your house come together and put this music festival. And you had brothers fly in from New York, Los Angeles, Texas, Chicago, driving from St. Louis. They came in from all around. Some I hadn't even seen for 20 years. And he's like, and they all came back to rally together and to support you. So had I not been at that wedding, the idea would have never happened.
That's great. So here's the last question for our discussion today. And I like to end this one, right? It's essentially rewind a little bit and knowing what you know now and finding the purpose in your life and all the stories that we've walked through. What advice would you give your 20-year-old FIGAM self? You're in the chapter house right over your shoulder. You're in room 28 and you're sitting there. What advice would you give yourself now that you've had these worldly experiences?
Oh, man. I guess couple things. Do not be afraid to fail. It took me a long time to embrace that. I was so keen to be seen as successful or keen to be seen as, oh, he's got it together or whatever that meant, and it precluded me from taking bigger and greater risks. And, I have taken larger jumps of faith and larger risks without having a safety net later in my life than I did much earlier. And I think a lot of those decisions, looking back at it now, were based upon fear, and fear of the unknown. And now I find myself embracing fear of the unknown even more. So if I could tell, 18, 19-year-old Kevin, to be like, you know what, it's okay. It's going to work out. Say yes, step into the unknown, and you will benefit from it.
That's terrific. Talk to us about how folks learn and the brothers learn more about Watts of Love. Website, how would they want to learn more and get engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is wattsoflove.org. We have all of our information far greater than we could cover here in terms of our mission and the impact of the lights. But we also have our scheduled of trips. And really, it might sound strange, but people are traveling. We took 8 people to Malawi. I think we've got another 14 getting ready to come up to another trip. And we're building up to like another 20 in Uganda. And it has always been my heart's desire. And it actually almost happened right before COVID. I'd love to take a bunch of fraternity guys. I'd love to take a bunch of brothers and just go out and serve. But, you can find all that information at wattslove.org. We're also on Facebook. We're on Instagram. And then some of my personal work is at kevinkuster.com. But we would love to have you involved in our mission of spreading light and joy and hope to people throughout the world.
It's terrific. Well, Kevin, thanks for sharing the story today, the journey, not only for yourself personally, but, the Watts of Love story. It's pretty impactful. And every time you and I talk about it, there's more things I learn about it, and it really affects me personally as well. So you're in Chicago, I'm in Denver. We're going to meet in Lawrence soon, and we're going to grab a schooner down at the Bull. We'll rally with the brothers, and we'll have a good time. So thank you again, Kevin, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Doug. Appreciate it. And thanks for bringing me back into the BCA and being involved there. And it's joining the fraternity still to this day was one of the best decisions of my life.
Excellent. And I'd like to thank all the brothers and friends and family listening to us today on the Banks. We look forward to seeing you again next time, where we'll meet new brothers, share interesting stories, and have those on the Banks moments. So until that time, I'd just like to say mighty proud to be a Fiji. Thanks so much for listening.